Well, thank you very much. Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here. And of course, Urban League is so important, what it's done historically. I am very, very cognizant of the many people who work so hard, including Whitney Young. And in fact, I'm delighted that the Whitney Young Award is going to Benjamin Crump. I've had a chance to get to know him. I'm enormously proud of him. Tremendous individual. But individuals like him, individuals like myself, would never have been able to accomplish what we did without the blood, sweat, and tears of so many people who sacrificed. And no one will ever know who they are, but it was their foundation that really provided the freedom for us to do what we do. And that's something that I think everybody needs to always keep in mind. You know, I remember as a 9-year-old sitting on the steps in the ghetto in Boston, having moved from Detroit after my mother, who was one of 24 children, had gotten married at age 13. And they had moved to Detroit from rural Tennessee, and she discovered that my father was a bigamist. And of course, that led to a divorce, and we went to Boston to live in dire poverty with her older sister and brother-in-law. I was sitting on the stairs looking through the building across the street, out of which all the windows had been broken, and the sun was shining through. And there was a sunbeam, and it made me think about my future. I remember thinking that I would probably never live to be beyond 25 years of age, because that's what I saw around me. Both of my older cousins who we adored had been killed. I'd seen people lying on the street with bullet wounds and stab wounds. And it seemed like a pretty dismal place. But you know, the fact of the matter is, with all of that going on, America is a place of dreams. My mother had a dream of education. She had never been able to get much education herself. And she worked very hard, 2, 3 jobs at a time, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back after midnight, scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets. And she didn't want to be on welfare. She didn't like the concept of being dependent on other people. And she worked long and hard. She occasionally accepted some aid, but for the most part was able to stay off. And that's not to say that I dislike people on welfare. There's a nasty rumor going around that Carson wants to get rid of all welfare programs and all safety nets for people, even though he must have benefited from them. You know, the people who say that kind of stuff, they have an agenda, and they're trying to undermine and divide people. I have no desire to get rid of safety nets for people who need them. I have a strong desire, however, to provide a ladder to get people out of dependency so that they become part of the fabric of America. That is really what we need to be talking about. We don't need necessarily to be dependent. We have to understand what true compassion is really about. There are those who came along claiming to be very, very compassionate, and they're going to eradicate poverty. There's a war on poverty. And we've spent a lot of money since that started in the 60s, over $19 trillion. And what has been the result of that? 10 times more people on food stamps, more welfare, more poverty, more incarceration, out-of-wedlock births. Everything that was supposed to get better is not only worse, it's much worse. And I think there's a reason that God actually gave us brains, so that we could actually analyze things. Choices. When we make a decision to do something and it doesn't work, you can say, maybe we should try something else. Or you can say, let's do more of it. And I think, quite frankly, it's better to use that brain to think about what things do work the other way around. You know, we need to be looking at the economic situation of this country. And how do we get it jump-started so that we give people courage and hope again. You know, there's been a lot of change, there's not a lot of hope. And we got to bring real hope here. How do we do that? Well, one thing that I've noticed, you know, spending decades in corporate America, is that we have a lot of corporate money overseas. Now, some people take that to mean that American corporations are horrible and greedy and unpatriotic. You know, our Secretary of Treasury said, American companies that do business overseas to escape the high taxes here are unpatriotic. Well, you know what that indicates? A basic fundamental misunderstanding of our system. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. So if you're smart, you create an atmosphere that is conducive to them making money here. And of course, you do much better if they're making money here because you get more revenue and you're able to do more things. That's the way it works. And we have this strange mentality that has taken root where, let's just say you have a tax system where you have a 10% tax rate based on the Bible, tithing. The guy makes $10 billion, he pays $1 billion. Guy makes $10, he pays $1. Now, some people say, well, that's not fair, because the guy who made $10 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. We can't let him still have $9 billion left. We got to take more of his money. Well, you know, the problem with that kind of thinking, which is called socialism, by the way, is that you now don't have as much money, that guy with $10 billion. So next year, he's going to put in less than $1 billion. More importantly, he's going to take what he does have and try to hide it somewhere. Now, the American system that made us a great nation and catapulted us to the pinnacle of the world in record time had a different philosophy. It said, that guy just put in $1 billion. Let's create a system that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment so that next year he can make $20 billion and he can put $2 billion in. And that's what expands the pot. That's what causes real growth to occur. And there are people who try to demonize that, and they try to say, no, that's the wrong ideal. The ideal is utopia, where nobody has to worry about anything from cradle to grave. We'll take care of all of their needs. And many people have tried that. The problem is, it always ends up looking the same way. Small group of elites at the top, a rapidly diminishing middle class, and a vastly expanded dependent class. And that's not what we need to do. What we need to be thinking about is those corporations over there, they've got over $2 trillion of assets, of money over there, which they don't bring back because they don't want to pay a 35% tax rate. So they're asking, what can they do with it over there? What if we were smart enough to say, we're going to declare a 6-month hiatus where they can bring that money back without paying any taxes, and 10% of it has to be used to create jobs for unemployed people and people on welfare. You want to talk about a stimulus that doesn't cost the American taxpayer a penny and has an enormous effect. There you have it. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. Now, you know, a lot of people, when I was growing up, concentrated on racism. A lot of racism, and it's going to keep you from being able to do things. And there was racism. There's no question about it. And there still is. And there always will be. There was yesterday, there is today, there will be tomorrow. As long as there are people with small brains and evil forces to stimulate them, it will be there. But what do you do about it? I remember when I was in the 8th grade, having turned things around, a horrible student before. My mother made us read books, and we were not happy about that. But back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. So, you know, I was reading these books, and as I read about people, particularly people of enormous accomplishment, I remember one of the first books I read, Up From Slavery, about Booker T. Washington, I began to recognize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. They can't stop you. And once I developed that mindset, I stopped listening to all the naysayers and the people who were telling me that I was a victim. And as an 8th grader, you know, I was the only black student in the 8th grade at Wilson Junior High School. And they have a ceremony at the end of the year for the person with the highest academic performance, and it was me. And one of the teachers got up and chastised the other kids because they obviously weren't trying hard enough if a black kid was number one. Now, was she an evil person? No, she was an ignorant person. And that's the difference. Some people are just ignorant. When I first went to Johns Hopkins, and I would go on the wards, and I would have on my scrubs, invariably some nurse would say, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Brown's not ready to be taken to the OR yet," assuming that I was an orderly. Nothing wrong with orderlies, but I would say, "Excuse me, I'm Dr. Carson, and I'm sorry he's not ready, but and they would turn about 18 shades of red. But I would be very nice to them. I said, "You didn't know, it's okay." And I would be so nice to them. You know, I had a friend for life. They would do anything for me after that. But, you know, you just have to kind of understand, you know, where people are coming from and be able to react in the appropriate way. And, you know, I was doing an NPR interview once, and the interviewer said, "Dr. Carson, I know that you don't talk about race very often. Why is that?" And I said, "It's because I'm a neurosurgeon." And she thought that was a strange answer. And I said, "You see, when I take someone to the operating room and I open up their head, I'm actually operating on a thing that makes that person who they are. It's not the skin and the hair that makes them who they are. It's the brain that makes them who they are." And once we begin to understand that as a society and we stop being so superficial, I think we begin to make an enormous amount of progress. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is we need to start thinking about economics, particularly in the inner cities. You know, in the black community in America, there is over $1 trillion worth of assets. That's more assets than the vast majority of countries in the world. We have to learn how to use that appropriately. You have to turn your own dollars over in your own community 2 or 3 times before you send it out. That's how wealth is created. And then you can't take that wealth and flee with it. You have to reach back and pull other people along. And if you do that, you have the ability, we have the ability within the black community to do enormous things on our own. We don't have to wait for somebody else. We don't have to be at the mercy of anybody else. People who have tried to convince us that we need to be subservient to them and that there, you poor little thing, I'm going to take care of you. Guess what? We can take care of ourselves, but we have to learn how to utilize our resources in the right way. And the other thing that is vitally important is we need to be able to work together and stop listening to the purveyors of division who tell you that just because you think differently about something than this person, they are your enemy. Divide and conquer and control. We don't need the people who divide and conquer and control. We need the people who learn how to use their various talents and energies together in an effective way. That's what's going to work. And for our young people, we need to begin to put out the appropriate types of models. We need to, when you look up at that light there, don't just talk about Thomas Edison, talk about his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, who was a black man, who came up with the filament that made that light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, who invented the electric lamp, who diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell. Talk about Elijah McCoy, who invented the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. Had so many inventions, when something would come up, they would say, "Is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy?" And you could go on and on and on talking about the tremendous contributions of black people to this nation. And we need to give those young men a very different vision of what success is for them, and holding up the right kinds of models. And we need to talk to them about how to conduct themselves. You know, is there injustice out there? Of course there is. But if you conduct yourself in certain ways, you're going to run into trouble. Not only with law enforcement, but with that other guy down the block. You run into somebody who's badder than you are, and all of a sudden, guns start flaring, knives start flaring. We don't need that. And lastly, in wrapping up, let me just say how important it is for us to think about the fact that the thing that got us through slavery, Jim Crowism, segregation, and all the prejudices is that we had faith in God. And there are so many people now who want to throw God out of our society. And they want to throw that relationship out. But there is such a thing as right and wrong. There are morals, there are values, there are principles. And if we hold on to those things, it will make all the difference in the world. Because if God be for you, who can be against you? Thank you. God bless you. Matt.
Okay. One question.
Okay.
Let's give Dr. Carson a big round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Carson. This is the beginning of the process, and I wanted to pose this. The National Urban League plans to share with the candidates who come here a short questionnaire.
Okay.
That will ask you for your position on issues that are contained in our 21st century agenda. And the crowd's very interested in knowing if you can commit to respond to the questionnaire on a timely basis.
I would be extremely happy to. You know, as I travel around the country, I'm doing lots of town halls, and I don't screen any questions. I'm very happy to answer any question there is. And the things that you've outlined as important, I would love to have gotten into, but you can't do it into 15 minutes. I'd be happy to get into them in some detail.
We appreciate it, and let's give Dr. Carson another big round of applause. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to